By 1947, the United States Armed Forces had done its job. The Marshall Plan to govern Japan and help them rebuild was underway. Many of the troops were heading home, ready to enjoy some peace. The Union Pacific was anxious to rebuild the well-used fleet of passenger cars that had carried the burden of moving troops to the coast. They also anticipated a post-war boom in high ridership as the country celebrated the defeat of fascism. The problem was that the railcar manufacturers couldn't keep up with demand. Manufacturers such as Pullman, Budd, and Riviasi had a hard time filling orders from all the railroads. In the meantime, the Union Pacific decided to give what they had a facelift. The two-tone gray paint scheme was created to give the Harriman era and heavyweight cars a new look. Here we catch 842 helping out Challenger 3984 up Sherman Hill with train number 17, the Portland Rose. At this point, I don't have any photos of two-tone gray Challengers operating in Wyoming. They were used in passenger service between Huntington, Oregon and Seattle, Washington, but this model is just too beautiful to be left out. At this time, the mechanical department didn't fully trust the diesel-powered E-units. The E6s were upgraded from their original designs, but a roundhouse foreman was always happy to have an 800 on hand to help out, as we catch FEF1, the 802, helping out Train 104, the eastbound city of Los Angeles, up the west slope of Sherman Hill, determined to stay on time. But bigger changes were in store for the FEF fleet. Cashing in on the successful city fleet of passenger trains, the UP switched all of them from tri-weekly runs to daily. This meant that they now had the top status on the railroad. Venerable trains like the Overland and Los Angeles Limited were given secondary status. The UP solution was to institute a range of accommodation trains. They weren't the fastest of schedules, but a rider could get from Chicago to Los Angeles on a budget. Here, the once proud Overland Limited gets an assist from a Mikado. Gone are the all-Pullman consists, with mail and express and coaches taking over. The Challenger trains were stricken from the schedule, with the San Francisco Challenger becoming the Gold Coast. The Utahn was established in conjunction with the city of St. Louis to bridge the gap in service between Cheyenne and Los Angeles. It carried the burden of head-end cars and was still studded with Pullman green sleepers. Here is train number 4 scorching the ballast across southern Wyoming with FEF1 810 in charge. She should have no problem making Cheyenne for her 4:50 p.m. appointment. The Idahoan was established to serve the same purpose between Cheyenne and the Pacific Northwest. Since the FEF fleet was entirely converted to burn oil the year before, the 800s were now free to tackle the Blue Mountains in Oregon, a task they were well equipped to handle. But the 800s didn't have to prove themselves, for their assignments didn't warrant all-out running. For example, the city of Portland was carted to make the dash from Cheyenne to Seattle in 32 hours. The Idahoan just wasn't in that big of a hurry. It took 43 hours to make the same run, an 11-hour difference. Shown later in its era, 838, an FEF3, has the fortune to be pulling all streamlined cars as it starts its run with a light load. First initiated in 1905, the Los Angeles Limited held the title as train number 1. It was a luxurious affair that became the first UP train to be equipped with electric lights. However, by the late 40s, This once glorious train, described as a palatial train for particular people, had become a true hodgepodge of random equipment that looked like a kaleidoscope of color on most days. Here we see the eastbound companion train number 2 struggle to start its ascent up Weber Canyon out of Ogden. Led by 842 again, this train will make the run from LA to Cheyenne in 32 hours, 6 hours longer than the city of LA. Having conquered the grade and stopped for water and fuel, the 842 is now free to run out the miles to Cheyenne. By 1950, the dogs of war were again barking at Western democracy. Troop trains were once more plying the rails to Pacific ports, and the UP's strategic middle route was no stranger to them. FEF 836 pulls into Medicine Bow for a water stop. To help the troops headed for Korea, the engine will uncouple and pull forward to the water plug. This will give some time for a special tradition of troop trains, the Red Cross ladies. My mom has memories of these trains. She grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, and these are her words. I had just turned 6 years old when World War II started, but there are some things I vividly remember. News of a troop train coming into the station is one of them. I'm not sure how the word got out that a train was arriving, but somehow many of Lincoln's housewives knew and met the trains with lots of home-baked goodies. My parents and I lived with my maternal grandparents, and Grandma was a great cook. We would take bags of her cookies to the depot and wait for the train to pull in. And then the fun started. The soldiers and/or sailors who were on board would put the windows down, and we would toss bags of fresh baked treats to them. There were lots of thank yous shouted back to all of us on the platform. We could hear the comments about who got chocolate or whatever the different guys got in the bags. They were not allowed to leave the train, so everything was just thrown up to their waiting arms. Those trains might come through at all hours, but I remember my parents and my grandparents talking about meeting the trains no matter what time of day or night they came through. This was just a very small thing to help the war effort, with a homemade treat to let them know how much we cared. The 800s served these trains well. With up to 30 cars behind a tender, FEFs could really scorch the rails. After the war, a common assignment for FEFs was to hold the schedule for trains 5 and 6, a mail and express daily between Omaha and Los Angeles. Here we catch 844 giving a lift to 839. Behind is a truly eclectic collection of cars. Since the UP interchanged with 8 different railroads in the Omaha area, a car from virtually any railroad full of mail for Los Angeles could show up. Lots of deadheaded equipment, meaning out of service, could be seen headed to home rails or its next assignment. Even though it wasn't announced in the public timetables, it nevertheless would carry a coach for passengers and a daytime cafe lounge. Its orders were to be allowed to stop at any town along the way, which probably didn't happen too often in southern Wyoming. Started in 1937, this blue-collar train will soldier on past the end of the post office contract in 1967 and finally be retired in 1969, with only a few cars filling out the consist. For the writing was on the wall. Car ownership was eating into passenger traffic. The list of discontinued passenger trains was growing at an alarming rate. The number of trains on the public timetable could be counted with both hands. All of them were dieselized, except trains 27 and 28, the San Francisco Overland Limited. It was fitting that this train would still hold down steam assignments. Beginning in 1887 with the numbers 1 and 2, it was switched over to 27 and 28 in 1927. FEFs would take command of this veteran train until 1956, the last year of full-time steam operations on the Union Pacific. By the mid-50s, the yellow decorating so many of the passenger cars and locomotives of the UP began to show in the express cars carried on these trains. This would be the third paint scheme for these 1939 built cars in 13 years. Their steam and signal connections would be severed in 1955, and they were turned over for freight service. With 45 FEFs 15 years old or newer, the UP still needed mileage out of them. By 1954, FEFs were already being moved east to Nebraska to work in freight service. So join me next time for part 3, the freight years. Thank you for watching.